His 41st president. On Outnumbered Overtime today, our coverage continues. I'm Harris Faulkner. Thousands of Americans are paying their respects right now to President George Herbert Walker Bush. He's lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda, his flag-draped coffin resting on the same wooden frame used for President Lincoln. Tomorrow, the casket will be moved to the National Cathedral for President Bush's state funeral. Peter Ducey has the latest from Capitol Hill. Peter?
And Harris, right now the wait to get in to see the president lying in state is about an hour. You can see behind me there are a couple thousand people out here in the cold. Once they get inside, they meet a security checkpoint that then snakes through multiple basement hallways all the way until the rotunda. People can pay their respects here until 7 a.m. all through the night, but a lot of people close to the Bushes are doing it today. That includes the president's service dog, Sully, who we just saw walk around Bush's flag-draped casket and lay beside it for a few minutes. He was flanked by beneficiaries of the Americans with Disabilities Act signed by the late President Bush back in 1990. Members of the late president's Secret Service detail, who spent years or decades with him, came to salute him as well. And so did Colin Powell, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs during Desert Storm while Bush was the commander-in-chief. The rotunda is very quiet inside, despite dozens of people shuffling in and out every few minutes. Many people are quietly reflecting or praying. Others are having a harder time containing their emotions, even if they never met the late president. And on the way out, every person is being handed a card from the family. And on the back of the card, it says this: "The family of George H.W. Bush deeply appreciates your prayers and many kindnesses as together we celebrate and honor the life of a loving and devoted husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, brother, friend, and the 41st president of the United States." And Harris, people that I'm talking to in the line are telling me that as soon as they found out they could go and pay a final respect to the late president, they got in the cars from 4, 5, 6 hours away and drove all through the night to get here just to say goodbye. Harris?
It is a beautiful scene. Thank you very much. The nation remembering our 41st president. Now let's bring in Ed Rollins. Ed Rollins served as campaign manager for the Reagan-Bush re-election campaign in 1984. I would imagine that you had quite a few conversations with the former president as you were trying to move forward for a new victory.
He was a wonderful man. I'm so pleased that the country is recognizing in these closing days of his life, and certainly now this great funeral that we'll see. He lived a great life, and every single part of it was very important. There's another picture, another great man, Bob Dole.
You got it. Former Senator from Kansas, Bob Dole, ran for president himself. I would imagine that during the 80s and even earlier than that, and during the 90s when I covered it, because I was at Fox in Kansas City when Bob Dole was running, that all of these men were looking forward to the future and helping each other on trying to find the footing to win.
And they did, and obviously following Ronald Reagan, who was a giant figure, was always difficult. But an added difficulty for Bush was that he was running against the first woman vice presidential candidate, Geraldine Ferraro, in 1984.
Let's pause for just a moment and talk about what we see in this picture, because with your history, Ed Rollins, I want to get your perspective. Bob Dole there, paying his respects to George H.W. Bush.
A truly great war hero. Not that they all didn't serve effectively, but Dole was, basically hospitalized for 2 years, totally crippled, came back, kind of came up through politics from like being a local DA to what have you, and they ran against each other in 1988, and there'd been some rivalry there. Dole had been the national chairman, just as Bush had, who succeeded him, and I think to a certain extent, there was a little pushing and shoving, but I think at the end of the day, they both had great respect for each other and both served the country ably.
By the time I had covered him in the 90s, Bob Dole had become one of those figures in the Republican Party where, yes, he's running for president, but certainly a huge voice in the party at that point. And we see him paying respects to the former president as George H.W. Bush lies in the rotunda right now. And we have Ed Rollins here, and you had many conversations with President Bush at that time. What were they like?
Well, he's a very generous man with his time and his friendship. You could take the 31 NFL football stadiums across the country and fill them with his friends. He had friends everywhere, and he was a tremendous friend himself. He wrote notes. He did all the little things that you do as if you're a courteous man, and he really was. Very few enemies in the political system in which he'd been in for a very, very long period of time.
You know, as I see former Senator from Kansas, Bob Dole, sitting there, it reminds me of the civility that this country is so steeped in. And you've known me for years,
right.
Ed. I'm the ultimate optimist. I think that things ebb and flow. And that we can get back there.
Well, I think there's no question we will get back there. I mean, I think to a certain extent, Trump is a different kind of president, and obviously didn't come up through politics. And he's tough. And from the day he got elected, there's been people out take him out, media and Democrats, and obviously he's got 2 more rough years with the Democrats in control of the House. But he's a fighter. He believes in certain things that he wants to get done. But this was a different generation, and these men were gentlemen.
Talk to me about, you know, when you see the public, and you heard our reporter Peter Ducey talking about this, when the public learns that they can go pay their respects as he lies in state at the Rotunda, it was a different era then. And you see a lot of young faces mixed in with this. If you never met the former president, if you didn't know of him, what would you say about George H.W. Bush?
He was a man of great integrity. He was a man who deeply loved this country. And every single day of his life, from the time he was an 18-year-old Navy pilot to this past week, he tried to serve his country and do what was right. And I think that kind of service is unheard of. And he served at many, many tasks and many jobs and did them all well.
In '84, did he help the new candidate win?
He certainly did. I mean, obviously, Ronald Reagan won 49 states and 59% of the vote. But he was very much a part of the team and did everything that you ever asked him to, and did it well. He wasn't as good a campaigner as he was a public servant. He didn't like the campaigning in the way that a Trump or a Reagan or someone else did. But he certainly was a very able partner, and basically he and Reagan had a magical relationship.
You stepped in to join me on the mezzanine at a very special moment with Bob Dole there. Ed Rollins, thank you very much for your time, your experience, and your perspective.
Thank you.
Fox News Alert now. There's a lot of news being made on this Tuesday. New signs that Robert Mueller may be wrapping up his Russia investigation. Yahoo News is reporting. Lawyers for the special counsel told President Trump's attorneys that they are, quote, trying to tie up loose ends, end quote. Prosecutors plan to file memos on former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn today. And that could reveal the extent to which he assisted the special counsel. So some of the topics, so on and so forth. Similar documents related to Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen are expected to follow. Catherine Herridge has all of the details now in Washington. Catherine.
Well, thanks, Harrison. Good afternoon. The special counsel's sentencing memo for former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn could come at any time, with a deadline midnight tonight. These memos lay out all the factors the court should consider to determine type and length of sentence. Flynn is looking at a maximum of 5 years, but it's anticipated the recommendation from the special counsel will be for much less. Flynn pled guilty in December 2017, so exactly a year ago, to one count of making false statements to the FBI about his contact and communications with the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak after the presidential election. Significantly, the sentencing has been postponed by Mueller's team 4 times. The memo is expected to shed more light on Flynn's contact with the Russian ambassador, on other evidence against Flynn, and more significantly, his level of cooperation. It's widely reported that Flynn sat for multiple interviews with the special counsel. But there are complicating factors. This House Republican-led Russia investigation published in March found that while Flynn pled guilty to lying to federal agents, former FBI Director James Comey and his deputy Andrew McCabe told congressional investigators their agents saw no signs of deception in the Flynn interview, with McCabe telling the committee, quote, the 2 people who interviewed Flynn didn't think he was lying, which was not a great beginning to a false statement case. Meantime, later this week, we expect Mueller's team to submit a brief about its allegations that former campaign chairman Paul Manafort violated his plea agreement, and on what basis. Manafort's legal team accuses the special counsel of strong-arm tactics, wanting information they say their client cannot provide or does not exist. While the memo is a public document, we understand some parts may be redacted or under seal to protect ongoing elements of the investigation. Harris.
Catherine, thank you very much. For more on this, I bring in Doug Burns, former former federal prosecutor. I want to get first thoughts from you because
Sure.
there's a lot of news developing on this.
Yes, there is. No, I mean, basically, we read the tea leaves as experts who've been doing this for 30 years. When people are going to be sentenced, that generally telegraphs that they are done with their cooperation, essentially. But to hang a fairness footnote, sometimes people agree to continue on. Michael Cohen, in his filing that I read through, Harris, said that he wanted to go forward, didn't want any further delays, but would remain available further. So, I mean, the point is there are exceptions to every rule, right? Mm-hmm. And this case obviously is an exception. But the point is it does look, as is being speculated, that they're coming to the end of the probe, basically.
Well, trying to tie up loose ends, I don't think you have to speculate.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear, exactly. And it's interesting that three individuals, Flynn, Manafort, and Cohen, are going to be apparently proceeding forward to sentencing.
So I don't know if you caught any of it, but we had a pretty impassioned discussion today with Ari Fleischer in the middle of Outnumbered on what all of this really, what is the bottom line? What should we be watching for in all of this?
Well, the bottom line, obviously, is going to be on the three memos that are filed by the government. Forget the defense. I read the Cohen memo, okay, and it lays out, you know, their mitigation arguments and so on. They say, interestingly enough, that he did it to protect the president, which to me isn't necessarily mitigation. Put that to the side. The point is, Harris, real quick, the three memos...
No, but it does send a signal to the president, like, I didn't completely stab you in the back.
I think that's a great point. I didn't totally throw you under the bus, but the point is, another general rule is cooperation submissions by the government are usually sealed, and I heard you guys, you know, adverting to that a little bit. So the point is, let's see if they're sealed or not. I would say it's an
Why does that matter?
Well, it matters because if it's sealed, we're not going to see it, okay? And we will not be able to.
So you don't think leaking happens at that level?
Hard to say. I mean, Mueller's office has been pretty good on that particular aspect. But the point is, let's assume arguendo, for the sake of argument, as we like to say, that the three memos come out. Cohen, Manafort, the other one, Flynn. It's going to tell us a great deal about the status of the investigation in the sense of what they've told the special counsel.
So here's what we were arguing about.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to hear that.
The threshold legally of trying to prove, and I use the word conspiracy because that's a legal linear argument that I can follow. Collusion loses me a little bit because I am searching for the legality of that.
Well, collusion is an antitrust term, as you've heard. It doesn't really necessarily make out a crime. Everybody's been a little too red-faced.
But conspiracy is at that federal level. That's a serious
Conspiracy
crime.
is an agreement to do a crime and an overt act and not necessarily doing it. That's where everybody gets confused. In my 30-year career in federal criminal law, people think conspiracy is more serious than the underlying crime. It's not. If you and I agree to rob a bank, hypothetically, so we're going to use this knife, hypothetically, that's the overt act. We're guilty even if we don't rob the bank. So the point is, conspiracy is an agreement, ostensibly, to violate some law.
So here's what some of the people on the couch argued, that you only need to prove that Corsi or Manafort or Cohen, whomever you want to choose, may have talked to WikiLeaks and there was a connection with Russia. I argue that no, in order to prove that the president was part of that, you have to prove that the president was part of that. You can't just take it on the word of these other people or the testimony.
I'm sure you'll be very happy to hear that I agree with you. No, in all seriousness, because the point is, yeah, they say that Corsi and Stone may have had some link to WikiLeaks.
Which is bad for them.
Corsi and Stone may have had some link to the campaign, but that's far from, and this is not a political soundbite by me, far from what you would need to prove an actual crime. So I agree with you.
Yeah, you need evidence. That's why the first thing in law school is evidence.
The first week.
I know. So let's talk about penalty and accountability here.
Sure.
Because it's been my understanding, based on what's been reported, and of course we don't know what Mueller would do in the very end, that you're not looking to seek an indictment necessarily here. A lot of this is political. Are there grounds for impeachment?
Well, yeah, you're right.
So what's the end game?
First of all, the key is the end game, exactly. And I think when the report comes out, it's going to be really interesting. I make a little minor crystal ball prediction. I think that Mueller's going to say, look, there are the two DOJ, Office of Legal Counsel memos that say it's policy that you can't indict the president. And then that gives him the opportunity to then say, but by the way, when they took this meeting in Trump Tower, it was inadvisable. Maybe it was somewhat unethical, but it's not illegal, you know. And I think that's...
One last quick one before my team
Please.
yells at me. Anti-Trump dossier, if that were part of kicking off this investigation.
That's a huge point. I mean, people on the right, we're going to call it, have been screaming bloody murder that the FISA court relied to a great extent on that dossier. Let me tell you something. I think the other side's worried, because if that really is borne out, and that's true, and books are starting to be written, material starting to come out, and there may be declassification, that's a serious problem for the left side. No, because if you misled a court to initiate the surveillance, for example, of Carter Page, which then led in turn to the genesis, the initiation of the entire Mueller probe, I mean, it's like the fruit of the poisonous tree. You've heard that term.
Yeah.
You know?
Doug Burns breaking it down like he always does. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
CIA Chief Gina Haspel right now wrapping up a briefing with Senate leaders on the murder of that Washington Post columnist, Jamal Khashoggi. Now some lawmakers are saying the Crown Prince is complicit in his death. Remember, they've been hearing her testimony today. The action Congress could take. Stay close. Inside the Saudi consulate in Turkey. Now some lawmakers are saying the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is, quote, complicit in that journalist's death. Here's Republican Senator Lindsey Graham from moments ago.
There's not a smoking gun, there's a smoking saw. You have to be willfully blind not to come to the conclusion that this was orchestrated and organized by people under the command of MBS, and that he was intricately involved in the demise of Mr. Khashoggi.
White House correspondent Kevin Corke is live on the North Lawn because the president certainly didn't see it that way. Now the reporting. Kevin?
No question about that, Harris. Very interesting, that briefing by the director of the CIA happening after the administration endured fairly strong criticism because she failed to attend, you may recall, a previous Saudi policy intelligence briefing. That briefing also included the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. Well, that is important, especially when you consider, Harris, that Director Haspel is thought to be the only top administration official to have actually heard the audio recordings inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul that appear to document the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Well, today, a limited number of stakeholders again were actually able this time to hear what Director Haspel had to say, among them South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham.
MBS, the Crown Prince, is a wrecking ball. I think he's complicit in the murder of Mr. Khashoggi to the highest level possible. I think the behavior before the Khashoggi murder was beyond disturbing. If the Saudi government is going to be in the hands of this man for a long time to come, I find it very difficult to be able to do business because I think he's crazy.
He called him crazy, said he's dangerous, and puts the U.S.-Saudi relationship at risk. You may also recall last week, the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, said he didn't listen to that audio recording. He made the comment that he didn't understand Arabic, so what difference would it make if he were to listen to that, or if it were in Korean? He didn't exactly say those words, but that was the general idea. By the way, the back and forth, Harris, could alter the U.S. and Saudi relationship because the Saudis get a great deal of support from the U.S. in the effort against Yemen. A lot of people have suggested that that's actually a proxy war between them and the Iranians. It's a very dangerous part of the world, as you know, and a very controversial relationship. Now what remains to be seen is what happens to the leadership of MBS moving forward. Harris?
These are all great questions. Kevin Corke, thank you very much. I want to bring in a congressman now. Jerry Connolly, a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Jamal Khashoggi also lived in your Virginia district. I want to get your first response on what we are learning from that Senate briefing today.
Well, listening to Lindsey Graham on your report, I think one can conclude that the CIA provided compelling evidence that there was no way this operation could have been carried out without the knowledge, the foreknowledge, and maybe even the planning assistance of the Crown Prince. Nothing happens in the kingdom without his approval at that kind of level.
You know, having you on the program allows me to ask these kinds of questions. And I really want to try to understand going forth now. The situation in Yemen is complicated. You've got al-Qaeda and the Arabian Peninsula on the ground there, too. We're trying to keep a watch on them. But can't we do it all? Can't we have some sort of punitive relationship going forward for however long it takes with Saudi Arabia and expect their help in Yemen?
Yeah, I think, sovereign nations can handle complicated relationships. We can cooperate on the one hand and not cooperate in the other. But in this particular case, we are dealing with the next in line to the throne of Saudi Arabia, where power, though shared in the royal family, is ultimately deposited in one head. This man is now a murderer, cold-blooded, premeditated murder of a U.S. resident. And a prominent columnist with the Washington Post, and then the disposal of the body involved premeditated dismemberment and secreting it out of the Istanbul consulate so that it would not be detected. This is a horrendous crime. We cannot countenance that.
All right.
Nor shall we do business with it.
I want to bring in now Senator Corker because he's just spoken seconds ago after that briefing. Let's watch.
I have zero question in my mind that the Crown Prince, MBS, ordered the killing, monitored the killing, knew exactly what was happening, planned it in advance. If he was in front of a jury, he would be convicted in 30 minutes.
Congressman, first your response to that.
Based on what we know, Harris, I mean, I would agree with that statement. I mean, we now know from intercepts that the Crown Prince had 11 phone calls with one of the key organizers of the crime in the consulate in Istanbul. We know that one of his key aides, in fact, his top aide, coordinated the entire thing from Saudi Arabia. In terms of circumstantial evidence, it's compelling and convincing.
All right. So let's get to the point. What action can Congress take? Because it seems like, and I don't think that the American people are wrong about this when you ask them in surveys and polls, that they don't feel like enough gets done on Capitol Hill. I see bipartisan support to do something. What should it be?
Well, the Senate, as you know, has already expressed itself. I think there ought to be sanctions. I think we ought to make it very clear that the Crown Prince is no longer welcome at events like the G20. That was a disgusting...
For how long?
Scene. Frankly, until his removal from office. He has no business representing Saudi Arabia or dealing with other powers because of his status.
Let me step in, and with no disrespect, just because I want to kind of get this out in staccato form. So when you say, okay, Mohammed bin Salman, you're gone, do we really have a right to do that as a country? Should we expect that to happen? And doesn't that look like we're getting involved in who they have leading their country? Is there that risk?
Yeah, that's a good question, but I think we have a right to say there are standards we set for ourselves and for you, and you got to meet them. And one of them is that you're not a murderer. And we're simply not going to do business with you.
Well, that's complicated
personally.
when you look at how many dictators we we sit down with, we talk to because we have to.
Well, we have relations with some unsavory figures, that's true. But we also have a long tradition of human rights respect where we don't do business with certain individuals because their acts are so heinous. They don't meet any basic standard of an ability to do business with them. I think in this particular case, because of the uniqueness of our relationship with Saudi Arabia, we have a right to demand accountability in this case.
Congressman Jerry Connolly of the great state of Virginia, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Harris.
Congressional leaders unveiling a 2-week extension. The government funding deadline has scooted. That happened last hour. Now, Washington dealing with the politics of that. We're also mourning former President George H.W. Bush. Could more negotiating time help the parties reach a compromise? We will speak with two men who have been on the front lines of the funding fights. Stay close. So it looks like Congress is going to get this done. Congressional leaders unveiling a 2-week stopgap spending bill to keep the government open and running through December 21st. The deadline to fund the government was this Friday, but the passing of President George H.W. Bush has shifted Washington's focus and our focus as a nation, understandably. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is insisting there will not be a shutdown and is urging President Trump to negotiate with Democrats. Watch it.
My advice to the president's not anything would surprise you. In the end, he and Schumer and Pelosi have to decide what they're going to do here, because even though this is a Republican government, the Democrats are not irrelevant.
Mike Emanuel live on Capitol Hill. So this resolution coming together in the short term, and then they'll vote.
That's right, Harris. Most expect lawmakers will pass a 2-week government funding extension to avoid a partial government shutdown on Friday night. The House is expected to go first sometime on Thursday, and then the Senate will follow suit. But already there is plenty of blame game underway, with a key Democrat noting Republicans are in charge.
I don't support a wall. I believe in border security. I think a wall is not a smart way to make us safer. But let's be clear. Right now, the Republicans are in control of the House, in control of the Senate, in control of the White House. They need to put together a budget to keep the government open and operating.
Should Democrats support some kind of compromise?
Well,
the 1.6 number has been thrown around here.
Let's see what they want to put on the table.
President Trump tweeted today, could somebody please explain to the Democrats, we need their votes, that our country loses $250 billion a year on illegal immigration, not including the terrible drug flow. Top border security, including a wall, is $25 billion, pays for itself in 2 months. Get it done. A member of the newly elected House leadership for the next Congress on the Republican side is blasting the Democrats.
In this situation, we've got a fundamental problem on the Democratic side, because I think that Leader Pelosi is, everything that she does right now is based on what's going to be necessary in order to get the votes to be Speaker. Obviously, she got the votes in the caucus. She's still got to get the votes on the floor, and I think she's got to make sure that she placates sort of, every wing of their party, including the far left. For the good of the country, we ought to be able to say, look, we've got to secure our borders, and the border wall is a crucial part of that.
Out of respect for former President George Herbert Walker Bush, this fight's being put off for 2 weeks. That means it'll come up again right before Christmas. Harris?
All right. Deja vu all over again. This is always at a pressure point. Mike Emanuel, thank you very much. Want to bring in two people now who've done a lot of negotiating. One of them, Josh Holmes, former chief of staff for Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. John Summers, former communications director for former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. You both have been down this road before. So, John, I'm going to start with you. Democrats have shut down the government. Remember the hashtag Schumer shutdown? It was only earlier this year over the idea of DACA. Why isn't that the battle cry right now? Hey, let's get a deal on DACA. Let's do what it takes.
Well, let's also remember, unfortunately for Liz Cheney, she seems to forget what happened this summer, where it was Republicans versus Republicans, not Republicans versus Democrats.
I want you to take my question now. I'll get to that one with Josh. I want you to take my question, because your side, your political aisle side, started this conversation with a shutdown over people who have come into this country who are now in limbo, not knowing what's going to happen for the Dreamers. Please take my question.
That is absolutely something that we need to look at, and that's something that was in a bill that we had passed, a bipartisan bill that we had passed in 2013 that, again, the House rejected, where we were able to provide not only funding for the wall, in fact, more funding than Trump is asking for today, but also still did some work to cover some of the folks under DACA.
You had a Democrat president then. I don't know what to tell you. That it's 2018 now. Josh, he does have a point. Why, with both bicameral Republican leadership, couldn't you get something done in the last few months with this president making this a key issue?
Well, I'll tell you why, because you need 60 votes in the United States Senate in order to get a funding bill across the floor. And frankly, Senator Schumer
But you couldn't get it in
clear.
the House either, and those were all Republicans.
Yeah, no, look, I think the border funding issue is something that used to be extremely bipartisan. In fact, when John and I were working together in the Senate, it used to be something that Senate Democrats supported fully. We had full wall funding back in the day, and somehow that never came to fruition, which is part of the reason why the American people are so frustrated about this. I think if you look at it, beyond any question, the president's right that we're going to need to enhance our border security based on the images and the stories that we've had over the last 3 weeks. I can't understand why what they're asking for is out of the question at all. It seems to me like a very reasonable request, and they ought to get it done.
Before we move on to the next subject here, it just seems a little mind-boggling. No one's asking you to do complete immigration reform. Heck, you couldn't do it in decades. Why would you think you could do it now in 2 weeks? But could you piecemeal it and get a quick deal? Yes or no, gentlemen? John?
That is the tough thing, right? Because you're never going to have someone be okay with one side having their elements that are important to them and then not have their own in there. So it is a difficult thing. And that's one of the reasons why you see both sides calling for comprehensive immigration reform.
Because it can't get done by the end of the year. All right. I think he answered for both of you.
I think they should, honestly, Harris, I think they should use this as leverage. They should get this funding bill done. But they ought to go into the next Congress with some further discussion on that, no question.
The president willing to wade in on this, and Republicans in the House didn't get it done. Can the nation now watch both sides come together is the question. President Trump, moving on, appears to be courting Democrats. He thinks he can work with the next Congress. He met with Red State Senator Joe Manchin yesterday, and he's invited some other top Democrats to meet with him in recent days. This isn't just an olive branch. He's sitting down with people, John.
Yeah, and I think that's great that he's doing it. So the question is, can he work with Democrats? Absolutely, he can work with Democrats.
He's a deal maker.
He actually used to be one. And to your point, he is a deal maker. But the big question is, will he be willing to work with Democrats? How much does he want to actually have a fight with Democrats versus actually getting something done? And I think that's something that the American people are wanting, is to see both sides come together and actually pass legislation that is meaningful to their daily lives.
Josh, earlier on the program, we showed Senator Mitch McConnell, your old boss, saying it will take the president to do a deal with Democrats. He was talking about the spending bill, but I would imagine everything else, too.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this president wants to work across the aisle to get some things done. I agree with John's assessment that that's what the American people are looking for. The problem is that the House of Representatives is not a corporate structure, right? Whatever the leadership wants to do, ultimately their power is to run the floor and set the agenda. They cannot control the behavior of every single House Democrat. And if you look at the energy within the Democratic Party right now, it is an energy that is full of a want for investigations, for impeachment, for sort of a more radical left-wing view of the world. And they're going to have to do their very best to repress that to try to get things done. But I'm dubious.
Wow.
Well,
that's honesty. Nope, I got to stop you there. Josh gets the last word. Great to see you both, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Harris.
And together we come together, I said that twice in one sentence, as a nation to mourn the loss of George H.W. Bush, the former president lying in state right now before tomorrow's state funeral at the National Cathedral. How he is being remembered by those who knew him best. Insights from a member of the Bush White House team next. And the nation continuing to mourn former President George H.W. Bush. He's lying in state right now at the Capitol Rotunda until tomorrow morning, when there will be a state funeral at the National Cathedral, followed by a private funeral in Texas on Thursday. For more, I want to bring in my friend, Anita McBride, who served as Director of White House Personnel under Presidents Reagan and Bush. Anita, I often lean on you at times like this because of your history, but also because of your perspective and optimism. Your thoughts today?
Oh, thank you. That's such a lovely way to introduce this, because I think all of us who are being reunited with each other here in Washington this week, who have worked together for so many years for President Bush and for Barbara Bush and for the family, are feeling very joyous and uplifted about the opportunity to be together, to honor someone we loved so dearly, who changed the trajectory of our lives and who has left such an imprint on the nation. I think the outpouring of love that you're seeing, the people standing in line in the cold for hours just to pay their respects, has been wonderful for the family and really for all of us that know that the legacy of this man is just tremendous.
You know, as you hear people talk, and our reporters have been interviewing people in line, and they say, oh, we didn't know that this was possible. He was a great man. We didn't know we could get this close. The lines are long, and they are standing in them. What would you say to them about all of those people who are standing to get in about this man?
Well, that this was an extraordinary leader, a good father, friend, husband to, you know, a wife he adored for 7 years. He led an adventurous and joyful life, and he did everything. No regrets in life. I think he was an example to everyone about seizing every day of your life, doing everything that you can to make the world, the country, your community a better place. The culture of service that he had, all of us, you know, felt that. And I think that, you know, in a simple word, is just he lived by example.
I know we have a couple of pictures to share that you have sent us, and I love these. Talk to me. I don't know if you're where you can see this.
I can see it now. Thank you. That was one actually taken in 2008, when, you know, years after I worked for him, but was now working for his son and daughter-in-law. I was Laura Bush's chief of staff at the time. He was in Washington on, you know, one of the visits that he occasionally made, and he would stay at the White House, and I was walking back from a meeting and he was walking back to the residence because he was staying there, and we caught each other in the colonnade and we're just having a really great little chat, just checking in on each other. You know, my husband had served as his personal aide as vice president and as president. That's how we met. You know, my personal life was affected by George and Barbara Bush too. So we would have, and that picture there is the last days of George H.W. Bush as president, and he was doing photos with the staff of departure. I was newly married to Tim. And, you know, again, these are great memories. I scrambled through to find some pictures. There's one with me in a very bad Christmas sweater that I'm grateful that you're probably not showing.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you doing this, Anita. And it's so great to hear the uplift in your voice. This is a somber time. It is also recognizing and memorializing someone who had such optimism in the way he lived his life. Anita McBride, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you, Harris. Thank you so much.
Well, we'll move on now. As Democrats weigh in on who's best to take President Trump on in 2020, Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke is emerging as a favorite among them. Is he a smart pick? He can raise money, but he couldn't win. Power panel.
The CIA chief, Gina Haspel, say they are more convinced than ever that the Saudi crown prince was responsible for Jamal Khashoggi's murder. And the NRCC saying it was hacked during the 2018 election. We've got all your news covered on the Daily Briefing live from Washington, D.C.
Beto fever appears to be growing among Democrats. A new online poll shows Beto O'Rourke, who lost his race against Senator Ted Cruz last month, emerging as a top contender to take on President Trump in 2020. He came in third behind the former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders. Bringing in the power panel now, Judy Miller here, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, Kevin McCullough, radio host with Salem Media. What do you make of it? Beto.
Oh, no, there's no way he's going to be the nominee, and he's far too progressive. If the Democrats want to win the White House, he's the wrong Democrat to do it. Joe Biden is their candidate for 2020 if they want to try to take back Rust Belt areas that Trump took away from them, and that's the map that
even though he's run before and lost more than once. But let's hear what Joe Biden says before we go to Judy Miller. Watch it. All right, then I'm going to read it. I think I'm the most qualified person in the country to be president. The issues that we face as a country today are the issues that I've worked on my whole life. The plight of the middle class and foreign policy, former Vice President Joe Biden said Monday night in Missoula. Very modest. Is he right?
Well, modesty may not be the quality that people are looking for in a president of the United States. I think my ticket and the ticket that I'm hearing excitement about is, it does have Beto on it, but it has him in the second position. Biden, Beto.
Really?
It's on a bumper sticker. Great energy there with that Beto would bring to a race. Biden has the experience and the ability to talk to working people. I think it's could be a winning combination.
Faced President Trump. And do you know why I say that? Because Ted Cruz was one of the most unpopular people running for Senate at one point. People weren't quite sure what he was going to do.
Except in Texas.
Except in Texas.
Right.
And also he ran for president. But he could not get it done, some critics have said of his, without President Trump dropping into Texas.
I certainly don't think it hurt anything.
Right. So hasn't Beto O'Rourke already faced President Trump?
No, not really, because there's no way Beto was going to win the Senate seat statewide. He's the wrong Democrat for a state as conservative as Texas. But The Democrats have an interesting primary calendar. California is near the beginning of the pack now. They're going to have to run to the left to get that big chunk of delegates early on. But where the real battle is going to be is in the Rust Belt. Will Trump retake all those states that he took in 2016? He's going to have to get reelected. Who takes him on in those areas? It's not a progressive. It's more of a traditional Democrat.
No, but I think that what Beto has is what Trump had for Republicans, and that is Democrats and independents who look at Beto think this man is authentic. There's something about him that appeals to people that even though they disagree with him, my Lord, he actually defended taking a knee. Colin Kaepernick taking a knee in Texas, conservative Texas. But people
He didn't win.
He didn't win, but he lost by only 2 points in one of the most
He raised
hotly contested
$80 million.
races.
Carl
That's right.
Rove told me on the air that he could have helped him win with that kind of money. It'll be interesting. You say Biden, Beto, and I say goodbye to you both, but thank you. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Fox News alert on a final farewell to the 41st President of the United States. Thousands of Americans filing into the Capitol Rotunda to pay their respects to George Herbert Walker Bush. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is a special edition of the Daily Briefing live from Washington, D.C. But first, the market's taking a dive with the Dow down now around 665 points. It was up to about 750 points. We're going to try to get Jerry Willis with the Fox Business Network to help us understand because she has been down there at the New York Stock Exchange, and there she is. Jerry, I'm sure there's a lot of news happening down there. Help us understand what's going on today.
Well, it's a big sell-off. I mean, in short order, that's exactly what it is, and it's across the board. Let's start with the Dow, down 670 points. That's 2.6%. The S&P 500 also down 2.6% or 71 points. The NASDAQ Composite, home to a lot of tech stocks, also down dramatically as well, 221 points. Behind this, a lot of conversation about trade with China. Will we get a deal with China? That's a big question folks are asking. And concerns about statements coming out of the White House. Are there conflicts between some of the president's biggest advisors? That's the concern that I'm hearing down here on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Now, the impact on the markets. We're seeing stocks that rely on China for a large proportion of their sales really getting hit hard here. For example, Caterpillar. That is the stock leading the Dow lower today, and dramatically so. That's because a lot of Caterpillar's sales of heavy equipment go right into China. Those sales at risk as this deal comes together, doesn't come together, as we wait to see what happens to trade negotiations between the U.S. and Beijing. Meanwhile, we're also seeing bank stocks trading lower here as well. JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, even companies like Capital One trading lower here as well. And the semiconductor index, so the stuff that goes into smartphones, technology of all sorts, chips, Intel trading lower here as well. We're also seeing Apple down pretty dramatically, and that's just not because of what's going on with China. It's also because of conversations about how well Apple is doing. One analyst on Wall Street downgrading that stock today, saying that they think that handset sales may have topped out. So there are lots of concerns down here today, much of it around the idea of, are we going to get a trade agreement with China? Or
he's 95 years old, and as you see there, he is helped by an assistant to stand so that he could properly and in his way pay his